so I'd worked at the Gazette for almost 10 years, and then I left when it hit hard times. And then when we got new owners, all of a sudden it seemed stable again, and I came back, and I'd worked with Joanna for a really long time, and we'd done some great work. And so I sort of like jokingly said to her, like when she hired me on late in 2012, I was like, okay, let's go win a Pulitzer Prize. And I didn't think that would happen, but here we are, and it did. But how the story started, you get a lot of crazy calls as a journalist from people who think they have a great story, and 9 out of 10 are nothing, maybe like 19 out of 20. But I got this call essentially saying, hey, there's this soldier from Fort Carson who was in the psychiatric hospital here in town, and the Army pulled him out against his will and put him in jail. And so I thought, like, wow, can they do that? That seems like a really bad idea. And I went to visit him, and he told me his story, essentially that he had had 2 tours, that he had been diagnosed with PTSD and other things, and that the Army had sort of always ignored things and medicated them and sent him back out on the line until he finally snapped. So, I mean, that was a really interesting issue. When these guys who are damaged snap, is that a crime or is that an injury, and how do you deal with it either way? And so I knew I had something. And then I left because my time was up at the jail, and I knew I was going to go back and see this soldier a few days later to interview him some more. And when I went back, he was gone, just gone. The Army had given him this piece of paper where you sign it, and once you sign it, you're out. They won't charge you, but you don't get any benefits, and you leave. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, isn't this exactly the type of guy who really needs benefits? Who needs them the most, and now he can't get them? How is that going to work a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And so he was gone. But I started looking around and asking people, well, how often does this happen? And what we found is that it was happening regularly, and it was happening not just at Fort Carson, but all over the place.
And I think it's really important to say that we spent a lot of time talking about what this story was not. It was not about every soldier, or it was not about soldiers who weren't in combat, or it wasn't about soldiers who had legitimate misconduct and had been discharged for legitimate reasons, and it wasn't about other issues. We worked really hard to focus in and not be distracted by other issues that the story could have been or might have been, or red herrings that kept popping up.
The start of this was just basically me doing interviews, me talking to as many soldiers as possible,
and then getting
and then figuring it out. And then after about a month, I would say, maybe a little bit more than that, I had narrowed it down to 3 or 4 people that I thought we should focus on, that all told like a very specific part of this story. And at that point, well, Michael, I mean, you tell the story. It was like happenstance of how he got involved.
So at the time,
he was, by the way, he was an intern. He was the intern.
The photo intern.
So I was the photo intern when this all started. Dave had just come back to the Gazette
In the fall of
2012.
Yeah, November 2012.
And I was given the assignment of shooting his headshot.
Yeah, they had to shoot
nothing exciting.
They had to shoot my headshot because the Secretary of Interior threatened to punch me in the face.
That's right. Yeah. So we needed a shot of Dave, and I got assigned that assignment, and got talking to Dave about what was, who he was and what he was working on, and it all sounded really interesting. And so I said, if you ever hear of anything, if you ever start doing a big assignment or anything like that, I'd love to get in on it. And so then a couple weeks later, when Dave had all these 3 people lined up that he had talked to for the Other Than Honorable project, I went over and chatted with him, and he said, "Hey man, listen, I got these guys, I got this guy, and I got this guy, and really interesting story. Let's go meet with them." And I was like, "Oh, okay, hold on. I mean, I gotta go talk to my boss first before I can just jump in on a project." And I went and go talk to my photo editor, Mark Rice, and asked him if it was okay if I could work on this project with Dave, and he said yes. He gave me the opportunity, and from there on out, I was working very closely with Dave, very closely with Joanna, and followed these guys for about 7 months.
I remember the first time I asked Michael to see some of his photos, having no idea what to expect. I thought, we got to have the intern on the project. Wonder what this will be like. And I was wowed from the very start. And I knew we were really onto something.
Well, the key to having the intern is that you could sort of like abuse him. So like, because these guys that we were reporting, like sometimes we were going to like terrible apartments. We were going places late at night. We were doing things at a moment's notice. We were doing things that are hard to do, like trying to make photos at Fort Carson, where they're trying as hard as they can to not let you make photos. And so I needed someone who was flexible, who could work weird hours, who I could contact about it, and it wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah. We went out on things at midnight, on my weekend, whatever it was, after hours, 16-hour days some days. It was wild and awesome.
Or you'd get a call that one of the soldiers was in the hospital, and having no idea how long you'd be there. You might be in the hospital for an hour or all day.
Yeah.
They all came to know and trust you, and that to me is remarkable, because the stories wouldn't have been what they were. I don't know what the magic was.
The hardest thing was these guys, by definition, who we were covering were guys who had brain injuries, and so their memories were scrambled. Like a lot of times they would remember things, but in completely the wrong order, and they just wouldn't call you back. And it's not that they didn't want to, or it was just that part of the nature of the injury. One of the guys, Gerald Jensen, a sergeant who had this injury where a piece of a bomb went right through his face. He's still I have no idea whether he'll call me whenever I call him. Even though we have this really close relationship, and that made things difficult because you had to deal with that, but then also you had to go to extra lengths to verify everything, because everybody's memory was suspect. Even if you could trust them, you couldn't trust their biology, essentially.
So the first time I hung out with Cash, who is one of our wounded veterans, started off the series. One of the first times I went and hung out with him alone, we were just going to go, it was myself and a veterans advocate. We were just going to go to a routine doctor's appointment where he was going to try and get some seizure medication that he had been lacking because the VA wouldn't give it to him because he didn't have benefits. And we arrive at this primary care doctor, and he gets up to the front desk and almost collapses. And this was the first time I'd been in a situation like that, but he got put into a wheelchair, wheeled back. The ambulance was called, the fire department came to assess him. He's back in this doctor's office, and they're opening his shirt, strapping EEG stuff to him, and just seeing what he was going through at that point was very powerful. Where I guess I got thrown into the story, and Dave's told me all the stuff that's happened to them, but it took a while it took that time to be like, wow, this is something that's going on with these guys. And then from there, I ended up talking my way into the ambulance and actually going with Cash to the ER and watching them, perform tests on him and, really check him out, and then just give him a couple meds and release him back into society, because there was nothing they could do for him. He didn't have insurance, so they gave him what he could and released him, and that happened to him 80 times in a year, I think he said.
Something like that.
And so just, being there to witness that whole ordeal, and then seeing what he was going through, and then being just sent back out onto the street was heart-wrenching and but really made the point to me that this was a story that we really did need to spend a lot more time on. And we ended up, from that point, that was in December of 2013, and we ended up
2012.
December of 2012, and we ended up finishing in May of 2013.
Yeah, and what was interesting is like you would go to these things where he's at the hospital, or he'll have a seizure right in front of you or something like that, and everyone you meet that has any interaction with him like decides this is obviously wrong. Like here's a guy who was injured in a war and he deserves the care, and yet the system was totally unable because of bad paperwork and bureaucracy to do anything about it, which was crazy. And like us too, I felt that. I mean, I still feel really conflicted about this. We were watching him suffer. We were watching these guys suffer, and we were doing it for the hope that by documenting it, we could make some difference. And what else could we do but use the tools of our trade to make a difference? But what that requires you to do is watch these guys fall apart. And there were times where I was not sure that Cash Alvaro was going to live to see the end of the story. I remember us having
Sassy was going to take his own life.
Yeah, or that Sassy, this guy was sitting in solitary confinement. Yeah, it was going to.
Or that Gerald Jensen wouldn't become so ill that.
Yeah, or he would just disappear.
Yep.
We had this conversation, Joanna and I, about what was acceptable in my behavior.
Very difficult conversation.
About what I could do to help these guys. And of course, I'm not supposed to help them at all, but as a human being, you have to help them a little. And, essentially what we decided was can I give this guy a ride to the doctor? Well, no, you can't. Can I call 911 for this guy, or perform CPR, things like that? Yes, you can. This is like we could save a life, but we couldn't help a life, which is really strange.
Or participate in
Right.
his life as it unfolded.
Right. And that was really hard for me. And I think it would have been for anyone.
There were so many incremental points where the work was coming together that, I would ask to see photos, or I hear that Michael had been out with Gerald Jensen and I want to see it, or where a draft of a particular part of the story would come back and we'd talk about it, and then Dave would go back and work on it and would come back, and I'd think, oh, we're getting there, we're really getting there. I remember one meeting we did though. We had, the three of us had worked sort of off in a corner, quietly, doing our other jobs, doing our day jobs all the time, but squirreling away little bits of time to talk about photos or video or records or a draft of a story, or pieces of the process. But it was time to widen the circle and get this up on rails. So I remember calling a meeting that was us, but also the photo director and our editor and our presentation director and one of our lead designers and our online director and our interactive person who was building our interactive. And when we got everybody in that room and started to look at the photos and talk about the stories, it really became real. And I remember a moment thinking, this is all going to come together. And everybody got so excited about what we were about to do. I think I thought we all felt like it was really important work in the moment. And that when the circle widened and it was time to get other people involved, everybody was completely bought in and really committed to seeing it through and getting it in the paper and getting it online. And that was really, I remember thinking in that moment, this is getting bigger. We're really going to get this done, and it's going to be incredible.
The finished story sat around for a while because it's layers of going through and lawyers looking at things and stuff. So and that actually helped us because as it sits around, you get more time with your sources to things happen. And you get to understand things better. And new data came in, like because we it took a while. We were able to get lots of data from all over the country, and that kind of was the fuel in the engine. To have anecdotal stuff is great, but to show the data behind it that this is something bigger that we all need to pay attention to. that was key.
When did you know this was something that was? I mean, did you at any point were you like, wow, this is going to be big?
Well, like Dave said, we've worked together a long time, so I knew it was big. I knew it was big because, and I knew that it was, I don't want to say continuation of the work that we did in '09, but in some ways it kind of was, about soldiers coming back from war.
Absolutely.
But it was different. I mean, it was different.
But without that foundation, I wouldn't
Yes.
have been able to say like, oh, so what if you let them out with no benefits? Because I knew you let them out with no benefits and people get hurt.
So I think right away, mostly because we've worked together for so long, would you say? And I trust him.
So the first person I really had contact with was Cash, and I knew that was big. And then when I got all the stuff with Jensen, that was big, but in a totally different way, because he's such an inspiring story. This guy who'd been blown up really badly and volunteered to go back. And then the third story of the guy sitting in solitary, getting assaulted by the deputies for no reason, facing 20 years in prison. He's sitting there without charge, was just so obscene. You know, that the system that these guys that are literally fighting for had failed them so badly. Like, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but it's true. Like, these facts were all so powerful that when I was writing them, and there's not a whole lot of flourish in the writing, when I was writing them, I cried. I can think about the sentences being strung together about Jell Jensen right now. And it's an amazing story. And so, like, there wasn't any ego behind it with me, like, oh, I'm good enough to win a Pulitzer. But what it was I was so inspired by these guys and by what was going on and a need to do something that, like, you know, I thought that story was important. And to the extent that it was important is I thought it at least had a chance to be as big as it was.
I have been thinking about the power of journalism, and that journalism really, really matters. It still really matters despite all of the changes and things that have happened in journalism and the state of the industry as unsettled, I would say, that the power of a story well reported and well told and well photographed and well designed and well edited and well copy edited can do amazing things, and that any newspaper can do this. Any newspaper. It doesn't have to be a big newspaper or we did it, and we worked really hard at it. But I've really been thinking about how much journalism matters, and that it can good journalism can happen anywhere.
You know, this is the first time that I really saw something that in action that has changed the business. The Gazette won a Pulitzer in the 90s, and the people that read that story were pretty much the people who subscribed to our paper. There was no other way to read it unless someone clipped it out and mailed it to you, which people did at the time. It seems kind of funny. And now it's totally different. Not only do we have the web, which of course is revolutionary, but now people pick what they read, and news can come to you if it's important enough. And so we crafted this knowing that it would have an audience through all sorts of different media. And so we made sure that there was video, we made sure that there was photos, we made sure that it had a clean and compelling web presence, so that that's what we did, and the rest was done by Facebook, essentially.
And Twitter.
And we had no control over it, and yet it became a nationwide story. And so to see that, I mean, that especially that's groundbreaking, because then stories, you as a limited regional newspaper can do something of national significance.
I mean, kind of to jump off of your point, I was excited to see how big a story with, I mean, we essentially 3 people, more on the fringe, tons more on the fringes, but could go. I mean, I was excited that when Dave let me shoot the story with him, I was excited when I saw that we were putting it on a really cool web presentation. Thrilled to see it get so much space in the paper, and then when things actually started happening, I remember when I heard that, or I think I saw an email about someone in Congress taking our reporting and using that to base a bill off of. I remember calling you a little bit freaking out, because something that we had done had made it to a national level where it was actually going to change the lives of some people. And that was astounding to me. And then it happened again in the Senate.
Yeah.
And, just to see this little project that we started with in December grow into something that, I was an intern at the time. I thought I was going to be doing this so that I can show my next internship, like, hey, look, I followed a couple guys around for a little bit, and it turned out to be some important journalism, but it turned out to be way bigger, way more important, and really actually, this is why you get into the industry, is to change things, and we did that.
I was stuck in an airport, and I had sort of put 2 and 2 together, because somebody at the Gazette had been notified early that we had won something, but we didn't know what.
Not exactly. That we might want to be.
We might want to
watch.
And maybe have some champagne ready.
Maybe, but certainly not that we had won.
And so the Joanna had kind of said, "Hey, we need you to call into this meeting at 1:00." And I hadn't been really paying attention. And then a few hours beforehand, I was like, "Wait a minute, the Pulitzer Prizes get announced at 1:00." And so I was like, "Okay, maybe I won, maybe I didn't." And for the next, it had been the farthest thing from my mind. And for the next couple hours, I was just sitting there like, "Oh my gosh, what if I won? If I won, it changes everything." But you didn't win. You can't win this stuff, it's too hard. But what if I won? For like hours, back and forth, until I was a wreck, like sweating through my shirt, just like standing there like shaking in the airport. And then my wife texts, and she texts me, it's at that point 2 minutes to 1. And she texts, "Take these 2 minutes to breathe, meditate, and reflect." And I was like, wow, that's really good advice. And I took a breath, and then I texted her back and said, "Check the website, did I win?" And she said, "It doesn't say yet." And it was like 101, 102. And then a text message popped up and it said, "1." And then another one, "National reporting." And I fell over. I couldn't believe it. And all the people in the airport are like looking at me, like, they're like messing on their phones, like looking up, and like it was crazy. And then I hurried home as fast as I could to share it with these guys.
I would say we'd really kind of put it out of our minds. I'd forgotten too.
We thought, yeah,
the work was done. We didn't do it to win anything at all. We did it because it was important to do. So I had forgotten that Monday was the day they were announced, and Joe, of course, we had submitted an entry, so we were then waiting to see at 1:00, and it was true. It was a couple minutes after 1, because we kept hitting refresh, looking. It's 1:01, it's 1:02, and then it popped up, and we immediately tried to get Dave in on Skype and gathered a newsroom, and Michael was here, and a lot of cheering.
Yeah.
Kind of like these guys, I hadn't really, it was my weekend. I hadn't really thought about it much. I knew that it was happening that day, so I had it kind of up in the background on a browser, just so around 1:00 I could, hit refresh and, see if we got anything or see who won. And I wasn't even planning on coming into the office because Dave was out of, I figured that Dave had read everything else that could possibly win, and if Dave didn't think that it was important enough to be back here for it, if he said don't worry about it, we're not going to win it, that why should I think any differently? So I was in bed watching TV, and I had a friend text me like, Pulitzers are happening today. He's like, yep. She's like, what are you doing for them? I was like, well, I'm watching TV. She goes, you're not at the office? And I was like, should I be at the office? She said, well, Joanna said not to text anything or tweet anything about it. She's acting really suspicious. And I said, oh, wait, but it's a public announcement, right? She goes, yeah, that's why it's suspicious. I said, so do you think I should go? She's like, go! What are you doing? Put pants on and go! She's like, okay, I can do this. Fine, I'll go into the office. I gotta bring a broken camera into the office anyways at some point today. So if it happens that I'm there when the Pulitzers are announced, so be it. And so I show up and I kind of talk to my boss about, this broken camera, and he's like, oh yeah, and I was told that I need to be ready for a meeting at 1, and I was really scared because it seemed really serious. People were saying, oh, we need a photographer ready at 1 in the conference room.
By the way, like meetings at the Gazette, like you need to be there meetings are never good.
Yeah, that's what Mark thought, that we're getting sold again, where there's going to be layoffs, something like that.
Yeah,
and he said
bad.
It took him 5 minutes, and he sat there and thought, and he went to the Pulitzer site and he said, Pulitzers, 1 o'clock. And so I was sitting at one of our old computers, because I didn't bring my laptop because I didn't think anything was going to happen. So I'm sitting at one of our old computers, kind of lackadaisically hitting refresh, and the computer, of course, wasn't actually working. And so I got a call from someone. I got a call from my girlfriend, and she said, and when I got the call from my girlfriend, I knew that we had either ended up as a finalist or won. Because there's no way she would call me.
She never calls you.
Yeah, that's right. I know. Doesn't talk to me. And so I answered, and it was just, you won! And then the bell for the conference room rang. It was like, we won what? National reporting. And then I was like, I gotta go. And ran over to the conference room, and Joe had gathered everyone in the conference room, and we're trying to get Dave on Skype, and Amanda showed up out of nowhere. And
Or not.
What?
Or not.
Oh, I know. I heard about this. And then there was a bottle of champagne in my hand, and Mark had his camera in my face, and Joe was hugging, and Dave was on the phone, and from there on out, it was just crazy. The rest of the day was just wild, but great.
Dave and I were working on this, and Michael, by that point, I think, in the fall of 2012, and then the Gazette had already been sold that summer, and we knew we were likely to be sold again, but we didn't know when, or there were rumors about to whom. And then on December 1st, we were sold again, and so a new owner and new management came in and a new editor. And I remember very early in January going into Joe's office, our editor, and saying, I need to tell you about this thing we're working on. You really need to know about it. And the first couple weeks he would say, I've got all this other stuff to do, tell me about it some other time. And I kept bringing it up because he really needed to know what we were working on. And for a brand new editor in a brand new market, with new ownership, to advocate for what we were doing,
To trust us.
was really, he didn't know us and we didn't know him, and he was brand new and ownership was brand new, and he had moved from Oklahoma, and that meant a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he really put himself out there for the work. And ultimately, he has said since then that this was about the soldiers we wrote about, and he was behind that. It wasn't like we'd all been working together for the last 10 years. He didn't know us and we didn't know him, and here we were working on this stuff.
And it worked.